Well, good morning. It's good to see you on this, I should say, Tuesday afternoon. Snowy day, COVID virus floating around, and well, we have lots of questions. And so I promised you on Sunday morning that we'd be looking at Noah's Ark, and we do a Bible study to go a little bit deeper. So I'm going to give you fair warning. This is not a Bible study for the faint at heart. I'm going to be as honest as I can. I might destroy some of your Sunday school views of Noah's Ark. So if you don't want that tampered with, you don't want to ask the difficult questions, listen, I get it. Ignorance is bliss, and sometimes it's best just to leave things alone. But I'm not that kind of guy. I like to know why. I like to ask the difficult questions. And one of the most frequent questions I hear, and I usually hear answered with a pat answer, mostly because it's a complicated answer. So it's not just like, oh, well, this is the answer. It takes some time. Like this, remember back not too long ago, there's been school shootings and such. And so this child asked the other one, why didn't God stop the shooting? I mean, that is a key question. Of course, the other guy, maybe flippantly says, how could he? He's not allowed in school anymore. Well, that answers it, but it doesn't answer it, does it? Why God allowed? One of the most difficult moments in my life was as a parent, and I think Caleb was around 3 years old, my son, and he was doing as little kids do. They were running through the house, and he was running up the stairs, and hear thump, 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 bam! And then the crying started. Well, that's not actually Caleb, but it's what he looked like. He had split the inside of his cheek from the tip all the way back here, and when I looked inside, I don't know how it didn't actually rip his cheek right in half, because I said, oh, let me have a look, and I thought, oh, it just banged his face. It was just like, I don't know how to describe it, but it looked like it was just going to come apart. I was like, don't open your mouth too wide. We got in the car, we drove to his sitters, and she was a nurse, Sharon, and I said, what do I do? What do I do? Because Holly was at work, and of course Emily was in school, and she just took one look and said, he needs stitches. And I was like, what do I do? So we took him to the ER, and the doctor, came down. Then of course Holly came from work, and anyways, I'll never forget, the doctors and nurses are all around Caleb, and they got him all stitched up, and they're putting the needles and the stuff in, and doing all the crazy stuff the doctors do. And then all of a sudden Caleb just kind of whimpers out, Daddy. That's a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Because here I am, I'm helpless. The doctors are working on him, but he's calling out for me. Oh, it was a very heart-wrenching moment. And you don't ever forget that sound of your child calling on you. And I think in that question or that time, I could have said to God, why did you allow this to happen? People, they like the idea of God being almighty. They like the idea of God being all loving. But then when they look at God as a God who allowed, they're wondering, how does this, Andrew, how can you have faith in a God who you say is almighty, is all loving, but all allowed? He all allowed all this stuff to happen to me. Yeah, I think that's a genuine question. I don't think it's a new question. I think it's one of the most important questions that a person needs to wrestle with in order to have faith. Is God really loving if this garbage is happening around the world? Is he who he says he is? These are like the real questions that are coming out of us. These God all allowed. Is he who he says he is? God answers this question several times in the Bible. He's not afraid of this question. But his answer is generally the same every time, whether it be in the book of Job, whether it be in the book of Habakkuk, whether it be in the book of Isaiah, whether it be Jesus himself. This is not a new question. And the answer is generally the same, and sometimes it doesn't satisfy. So we're going to unpack it. So I hope that you can come to a satisfaction, or at least, okay, well, I understand how you came to this, Andrew. This doesn't satisfy me, but at least I'll understand how you got to a place where you can believe in a almighty God, an all-loving God, and a God who out. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways. I watched one episode of the Messiah video on Netflix. Couldn't help but realize, this Jesus guy, he was an authority. Like this Messiah character was in authority. Someone said the women couldn't come to the circle to talk, and he's like, who decided that? God's not just our buddy. If you believe God is actually God, he has authority to do whatever he wants. Even if it was terrible and evil to allow or to manipulate, what I'm saying is that's not who he is. But his thoughts are not our thoughts. He has a very different perspective. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. And you can't really see it very well, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Which means he's working at a higher capacity mentally than us. He's not playing on the same field as we are. We're on a different field, so to say. He clears up every time as well. He clears it up. He says, okay, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your way. In Job, he's like, where were you when I created everything? Where were you? Like, who? Like, he calls us out on our arrogance in the sense that we feel we have the right to judge God. Now, I think it's all right for us to question and ask questions, and I don't think God's intimidated by our questions, but there is a certain amount of arrogance in us as a created creature to put God in court, so to speak. Now, however, that being said, it happens. People put God on court all the time. There's even a movie where it's Jewish folk who were in, I don't know if it was a real story or not, but they put God on trial in the camps, the Nazi camps. And wow, yeah, I could see why they did that. They were feeling like, why has God all allowed this in our lives? What I have found is that God usually begins with this, but then after he's asserted his authority, he goes on to say, of course I'm doing something about this. Don't you know I care? And each time with Job, with Habakkuk, with Jesus, like they always go on to explain that they are doing something about the situation. But I think it's to understand that these disasters, these plagues, these famines, these tragedies, they're coming. We don't always know why they come. We don't always know how they come, but it's beyond us in some ways. In fact, did you know Canada used to have locust plagues, locust swarms? Yeah, out west. Back in the just before 1900s, they used to come in the trillions. One of the entomologists were saying that it's difficult in some ways for us to imagine the terror that these little locusts used to have on the out west, on the prairies. They'd come down in their trillions. But in a few short decades, and they're not sure why, suddenly their population went from trillions to zero. We don't get it. We think a lot of it has to do with modern development in there, but it's no longer a plague we have to worry about. But I think there's, physics will teach us that there's every action has an opposite and equal reaction, correct? This is people making fun of flat earthers. I'm sorry if you believe that the earth is flat. We're not on the same page. You're allowed to believe what you want. But I see that there's certain rules in place, and gravity is one of those rules. And when it comes to those rules being in place, we don't often blame God. Like if I take duct tape and I drop it, gravity works. God, why did you allow that to happen? That doesn't make any sense, does it? God, why did you could have stopped that. You could have stopped that duct tape from falling on the ground. Well, God has put up a system of laws in place, and we don't blame God for when those laws work, do we? Like, I don't wake up in the middle of the night with my face plastered up against the ceiling thinking, oh, gravity's not working. God, why did you not put gravity back into effect? No, God doesn't work that way. There's laws that allow a bumblebee to fly that we as humans, we haven't quite got it figured out yet. His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. He has a very different perspective on things. We got to be careful. Like, this is an example someone brought to me too, right? And so this guy was challenging some atheists to about the fact that there could be a God. And now the argument is good in some ways, it's not so great in other ways. So he basically says to the guy, he says, just say this is all the information in the world. And he said to this atheist or the scientist, whoever it was, how much do you think you know of all the information in the human world? And so the guy went, scratching the top half. And he said, that's a lot. You're pretty smart, aren't you? He says, yeah, I'm pretty brilliant. He said, so you're telling me that though you know all of this, you're saying you know for sure that there is no God, there's no eternal life, there's no salvation, there's no Christianity that works in this whole area. And it just kind of reminds us of our arrogance to think that because I know this much, I'm making assumptions about that much. Now, this argument can be used to say, well, for the information like unicorns could exist, right? So I don't like it for that argument. But I think it shows us, most importantly, that we know this much. We got to be careful not to be arrogant in our assumptions that we know it all. I would say that that's how people fail math tests. I used to struggle with math quite bad. And my biggest problem was I thought I had all the facts. I did it right with what I had, but I didn't actually incorporate all the facts, especially with word problems. I'd always miss something. It confused me. But not just that, that's how when engineers build bridges that fail, it's because they didn't incorporate all the facts. And when we don't know all the facts, we can't make a proper judgment. And so I take his argument and I twist it to my own a little bit and saying, more than a sign to prove that God exists, I would say this is a sign to say that, man, we don't know as much as we think we do. And so I bring us back to Caleb and his operation on his face. So if I walked into the operating room and there was this dude dressed up really freakily in blue, and all I could see was his eyes, and he had sharp sticks and pointy things, and he was surrounded by other people dressed up, and I could only see their eyes, and they had these glasses and these weird tools, and I walked into the room, this guy's poking at my son's face, and my son calls out, "Daddy, what do you think I'm going to do?" If I didn't have all the knowledge, I would just go a little crazy. You know what I'm saying? Like somebody sticking something in my son's face and he's calling out for me for help. I wouldn't understand what was happening. And I'd go a little crazy. I'm sure I would. I'd go full Papa Bear. The same, I think, is when we look at what God is doing. We don't always understand. We don't have the information to judge him accurately. I think that we take with what we've got and we judge him with what we've got, the mental faculties we have. I think we take what we have and we do our best. But I think it's important when we go to judge God that we go humbly. It's like trying to judge maybe a politician or someone who would say, "Oh, well, I would have just done this." That sounds simple, but maybe you don't have all the information to make that kind of judgment. Like, it's easy for people to parent shame, or there's a movie I shouldn't have watched once upon a time called Joe Dirt, and there's this car parked in a handicap parking lane, and this guy gets out and he's so mad, he just, because he sees this really healthy guy pull up into the handicap parking spot, goes into the store, and so the hero of the movie goes and starts smashing this car out, and it's a classic car, it's beautiful, and he's just totally wrecking this car. And then the big healthy guy comes out and he's got his elderly father with him. He's like, "Oh, he made a judgment with the information he had, but it was inaccurate when everything was brought to light." And so I'd like to suggest to you today, and this is how I come to, how do I take this whole matter of, God's almighty, God's all loving, but he also allowed. Why would he allow this to happen? I don't have all the information. But I do recognize that a Band-Aid on Caleb's mouth was not going to fix the problem. Probably would have made it worse. I don't know if it would have torn. He would have this cool scar across his face. And chicks dig scars, so he'd be happy with that. That's a line from Batman. Sorry, I shouldn't have. Anyhow, the idea though is that a Band-Aid doesn't fix bullet holes. I think the great theologian Taylor Swift wrote a song about it. Band-Aids don't fix bullet holes. They don't. Let's look at the situation on earth, okay? You have to understand that God has given us the gift of free will. And this is how I kind of understand this. If there wasn't free will, there wouldn't be genuine love. You have to have the freedom of choice. And I tell people sometimes, if you're praying to God, asking for that person, oh Lord, make them fall in love with me, it's not going to happen. He will not break someone else's will in that way. It's not how he works. He doesn't, he honors our free will. It's very much like a parent, right? Your kids grown up, they're little, and as they get older, you know, they become adults and they've got their own life, and you have to honor them. You have to honor their decisions. They're adults now. If you don't honor their choices, whether you like their choices or not, you're going to break relationship, and it will be on you. There is a humility that is so difficult for us who were once in authority to swallow the humble pie and say, oh, you're the mom and the dad of these kids now. I have to honor your will. I can pray for you like I want behind closed doors, but I need to show honor and respect because you are now an adult, and I don't get to make the choices for you anymore. You get to choose your own clothes. You get to pick your own clothes out. Embarrassing story. I bet you like this. Well, I can remember. I'm pretty sure it was grade 4. Oh, this is embarrassing. I'm going to share it anyways. My mom still dressed me. I think my mom had pretty good taste in clothes. I liked it very much. I went to school, and my friend Andrew, he had a shirt on. It was a Sid Vicious shirt, and it said, "Does your mom still dress you? Get home and dress yourself, and get dressed yourself." And I looked around the room, and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm the only one in this classroom whose mom still dresses them. So I didn't say anything to anybody till about now. And when I did that, I got home, and the next day, my mom had my clothes all laid out, and I decided I was going to pick my own clothes out. There was no big fuss. My mom was just doing an act of kindness, and I was more than happy to let her take care of me. I still love when my mom takes care of me. She sent us chocolate treats and little Rice Krispie boys the other day, and I love it. My mom takes care of me. So it's interesting how we evolve and how our relationship evolves with our parents. And so we have free will. Now, having free will, I think, is absolutely awesome. I love it. But my friend David, I think almost every summer he'd break his arm. I don't know if it was every summer, but all through elementary school. He'd come to school back in September with a cast on his arm, like, what happened? He had jumped off a building or jumped off a garage or tried something crazy, or and with his free will, he developed some consequences that required a cast. And so let's look at it from God's point of view for a second. You've got billions of people on the planet, and you want to honor their free will. How do you even begin to handle that? I couldn't even handle 100 people. My goodness. The task is humanly impossible. Our God is so much more capable than we are. He's got much more up here. Our God is able to handle billions of people's free wills. And as free wills collide, you know what happens? Sometimes someone else's free will collides into mine, and I get hurt, and I didn't do anything to deserve it. They have used their free will flippantly. I worked with a girl at Sobeys, and her mother had been killed by a drunk driver, and then her dad remarried, and then her dad was killed by a drunk driver. This world is broken. What we do with our free will sometimes is absolutely terrible. Families are wrecked. Abuse happens, both sexual. There's cases of incest in the world. There's terrible things that happen because some people use their free will to hurt others, or maybe to satisfy their own urges, or they take advantage of someone, or maybe they're just so broken themselves they can't, unless they get professional help, they can't help themselves. That's why we have prisons. That's why we have doctors. That's why we have mental institutions. It's very rare that God intervenes in history. I say, God is a gentleman. Generally. And I say that because sometimes when God intervenes in history, it's done on a world scale. It's done very powerfully, and lots of people die. I think of Moses leading the Israelites out from slavery. 400 years of slavery. I bring us back to that point of Caleb again, when he called out Daddy. God listens to all of the situations happening in the world, not just the easy things. He hears kids laughing, and he hears people playing, and he hears all the satisfied happiness of someone who's just had the best chicken Alfredo in their life, or maybe they've seen some of Bruce Anderson's food that he's cooked. Whew. But he also hears people breathing their last breath. He hears people crying because they've just been hurt. He hears and knows all of these things. And if you think that he is taking great pleasure in this, nope. If you think he's just sitting there idly in heaven saying, oh, I'm so powerless to do anything about this, no. But it's not a Band-Aid fix. It's not just something he can just go, well, if he did, we'll come to that solution a little bit later. God has an overarching plan of salvation for humanity. It's the story of the Bible. We call it history. Some people call it his story. Right from Genesis, it is clear humankind falls. God has a plan of salvation. It's not a Band-Aid fix. Immediately, animals are sacrificed to give Adam and Eve clothing. God intervenes to save humankind. He sends Moses, and history, he intervenes powerfully. There's the plagues. The next time God really intervenes so powerfully is when Jesus Christ comes as the ultimate sacrifice. And it's paralleled in the Moses story through the Passover. As we come into Easter, the Passover story, Jesus going to the cross, there is a parallel between the blood that was spread on the doors of the Israelite slaves and the shape of the cross as the blood drips down. There's so many parallels between the cross and the Passover. Jesus was known as the Passover Lamb. If you want to do a study on that, you can Google that. Incredible. Couldn't be coincidence. God intervened, and in the midst of the intervention, we've discovered we had an enemy. We call him Satan. Around the birth of Moses, babies were killed. Satan tried to abort God's plan. When Jesus was born, babies were killed because Satan was trying to abort God's plan. But there was no stopping God's plan of salvation for humankind. Well, we've hit a lot. Maybe you need a little break for a second. So I'm just going to recap what we've gone over. This, again, I said, is not a simple Bible study. This is a pretty deep subject. If you need a break, this is a good place to pause. We're going to get into our next part here.